I happened to be in Johns Hopkins in Baltimore the night that Kennedy came on the air to address the nation about the Cuban crisis. And I remember it well. The McKendree Hall, the residency hall, was packed with students, and the president came on at 7 o'clock, and the television said, the president will address the nation after this message. And I'll never forget the message. It was an advertisement for L&M cigarettes. Well, that was in October. In December, I'd moved on to Columbia University in New York. And then, of course, we had to have a conference with Jacqueline's father and with Sherger, who was head of the Defence Forces in Australia, and it was decided that it would be safe for me to stay on and not to come directly home. And then I subsequently went to the University of Miami and then came back to Melbourne. Back in Melbourne, I started up the first specialist medical chair in the Australian Commonwealth at the Ioneer Hospital. And I came back to very humble beginnings, I might say. The offices that I had allocated to me were in one of these old Victorian houses on the corner of Morrison Place and Victoria Parade. So one of the first things that had to be done was to double glaze the windows, otherwise you couldn't have heard yourself think. I started on the 1st of April. It was colder in Melbourne than it had been in Boston at -10. There was only linoleum on the floor. I had to go down to the hospital manager's office and walk in on his plush carpet and central heating to rail against the paucity of facilities that had been provided to me. And one of the ophthalmologists who was on a board that was there to help me said he'd spoken to the architect and told the architect that I would need water and electricity and possibly gas in the laboratory. I said to him, "Jim, you are absolutely right." So that was the start of life at the university. I might say when I came back at the age of 29 into this chair, there were only 9 professors on the university faculty, and all of them had been my teachers and mentors. Now today I think there'd be something like 100 professors in the medical faculty. One of the first technicians I had was a fellow called Bill Charles, whom my twin brother had convinced should come to Australia to join me. Now, so Bill Charles built up a photographic unit for me, and then a young fellow arrived from Geneva. His name was John Marie Perel. He spoke no English at all, and he came with a letter of introduction from Professor Hans Goldman, who was the doyen of instrumental ophthalmology in the world. And Perel then set about developing our biomedical engineering laboratory. And the first task I put him to was to develop a spectacle-worn indirect ophthalmoscope, which became a worldwide instrument, displacing most of the head-worn instruments that were at that time in fashion. And today it's still a leader in its field. You see, the head-worn instruments were great big things with a big lamp on the top. And it was John Marie Perel who designed this tiny lamp housing, and it all turned on the optics of the lens in the front here, the condensing lens. So you're able to miniaturize it. And this thing would weigh about 100 grams. The head-worn instruments would be up almost 1,000 grams, you know, quite heavy things to wear. And you have to have a crushing thing locking it on your head. And then we developed what we called a COMEDO, a combined operating magnifier and a miniature indirect ophthalmoscope. Is there one in my bag there? There is. Haven't got one to show you, but that really is a great instrument.
This was painted when?
This was patented in about 1968. Yep.
And that was distributed?
Worldwide. It wiped off the sales. We offered this originally to the Keeler Company in London, and it knocked off the worldwide sales of Keeler. Then they came out with a copy of this, but it never really caught the world sales of this instrument. Now that's you know, we've developed it further on from this, but the basic instrument's still all there. Yeah. In 1966, when I was only 3 years into the chair, I was appointed to the International Council for Ophthalmology by Sir Stuart Duke-Elder and Professor Jules Francois, and my term of office was 8 years, and it really gave me a world view of ophthalmology and of medical politics. And I was used in 1978 as the mediator between the People's Republic of China and the international body to draw them into the International Council. And I was in China as an official guest of the Chinese government for 1 month in 1978. And the night before we left to go to the international meeting in Osaka, the head of the Chinese medical government body came to our hotel room, and we signed up a document which I took to Osaka and presented to the president. Akira Nakajima, who's a good friend of mine, was the president of that international meeting, and he had been trained in London by Professor Sorsby. About 6 weeks after the meeting in Osaka, I went back to Oxford to a meeting, and Akira came from Tokyo to Oxford, and I said to him, "What have you been doing?" He said, "Oh, I've been to China, to Peking." He said, "I've had 3 days in Peking." I said, "How did you get on in Peking?" Now remember, he was the president. I'd taken the document to him. He said, "Oh, fine, except they wouldn't let me meet any eye doctors." Now, it's a very oriental story, but the truth of the matter was that the Chinese were not going to join the International Council while a Japanese was head of the organisation, because they've never forgiven the Japanese for the Nanking massacre. Now, there was an even more interesting thing in that meeting of 1978, because I'd worked for a year in London with Sir Norman Ashton in ophthalmic pathology, and then after that I'd worked with Zimmerman at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington. And we were part of the official welcoming committee for the Crown Prince and the Princess. And all the Americans were literally drooling at the mouth at the prospect of meeting these great Japanese figures, you see. And Jacqueline and I were right down the end of the queue, standing next to Norman Ashton, who for some reason or other happened to be at the very bottom of the queue. And the official party came in, and they sailed clean past the Americans, and they came so that the Crown Prince stood and talked to Norman Ashton. Now, the Crown Prince, like his father Hirohito, was a biological scientist, and he was to present a gold medal to Ashton for his work on the pathology of diabetic retinopathy. So he was only interested in talking to one person, that was Ashton, which put the Crown Princess right in front of my wife Jacqueline. And they fell into conversation, as Jacqueline easily does, and it transpired that the princess had gone to the Seishin school in Tokyo during the war, taught by the Sacre-Cœur nuns, run by the Sacre-Cœur nuns, and taught by Mother Ma, who'd been a classmate of Jacqueline's mother. So the Crocks came away from that meeting feeling rather chuffed. In 1985, it was heading up towards the 50th anniversary of the foundation of the department at St Vincent's Hospital. It was founded by Thomas King, and he was there for 25 years. And it was apparent that I was going to be there for 25 years. So I said to my wife, 50th anniversary, it's time we left. I'd like to go back and live in Europe. I have a spinal disorders unit with my wife, Dr. Carmel CROCK, as first assistant, Dr. Brian Galbally as the physician who manages complicated medical problems. And ever since I've been in London, I've continued to attract international scholars to work with me from the United States of America, from we had 2, and most of the others from Japan. I said to you that we grew up with a deaf-mute boy in Perth. That was Jimmy Young. One weekend, Dr. Peter Bladen, who was a resident with us at St Vincent's, invited me to Phillip Island, where they had a very simple fibro by the sea. And I asked if I could bring this deaf-mute boy down, and I brought him to Phillip Island. And Jacqueline was there. Now, I'd only seen Jacqueline as a student and as a member of the Newman Society from a distance. I'd never met her, and I met her for the first time at Phillip Island, and she was so remarkably good to this deaf-mute boy. I said, this is it. And I suppose you'd say, Damien, it was love at first sight. But so that completes the circle, really. I mean, it brought us into medicine, it brought me into a very happy married life. And one would have to say a very successful married life. Well, our eldest, Patricia Ann, was born in 1957. We were married in December, and she was born in September. And I remember one of our friends saying to Jacqueline, when were you married? Then Mary was born in Perth when we were en route to England, really. She was born in February 1958. John was born in 1960. We bounced across London in a London ambulance down to Wimbledon, where John arrived in pretty short order. And then a couple of years later, Marnie arrived. And we left England in October '62 when Marnie was 6 weeks old. Back in Australia, Peter and then finally Paul arrived in 1968. That makes the tribe.